What do you do when God goes silent? When the doors stay closed, the prayers go unanswered, and nothing makes sense. Let me ask you something. Can you trust a God you don't always understand? Most people say yes until life happens, until the job is lost, until the diagnosis comes, until the relationship ends. Listen to me. Faith is not proven in the presence of answers. It is forged in the absence of them. If you could understand everything God is doing, He wouldn't be God, you would. Today I want to challenge your heart and stretch your spirit. Can you walk with God when the path is dark and your hands are trembling? Let me tell you something that will shake your comfort. If your faith still fits neatly inside your logic, then you're not walking with God. You are walking with your understanding. We have become addicted to clarity, obsessed with control, and enslaved to answers. But kingdom living doesn't start with explanations. It starts with surrender. The modern believer is often waiting for a spreadsheet from heaven, a step-by-step plan, a risk assessment, an emotionally convenient strategy before they move. But God never promised clarity. He promised presence. The God who created the galaxies, the atoms, the oceans, and the blood in your veins, He does not owe you understanding before He requires obedience. And if that bothers your ego, then maybe your ego has been sitting on the throne of your life instead of the king. Let me remind you, Noah built an ark without ever seeing rain. He didn't have a cloud forecast. He didn't have a scientific explanation. He had a word. And some of you are drowning because you're waiting for evidence when God is waiting for obedience. Faith is not an agreement with facts. Faith is defiance against fear. It says, I will go even when I don't know where this leads. Too many people want to trust God with conditions. Lord, I'll step out if you show me the full plan. Quotes God, I'll forgive them if you explain why they hurt me. Father, I'll give if you tell me when the money will come back. But that's not trust. That's negotiation. And God is not your business partner. He is your king. When God speaks, He often speaks in fragments. He gives you just enough light for the next step. And if you won't move until the whole path is revealed, then you are not led by the Spirit. You're held hostage by your intellect. Some of you are delaying your next season because you're asking questions God never promised to answer. Why did the child die? Why did they betray me? Why did the job fall through? Why was I left behind? And here's the truth. You may never get the full explanation on this side of eternity. But hear me. Trust is not built on answers. Trust is built on who you know God to be. And if you only believe when it makes sense, then your God is your logic, not the Lord. When God told Gideon to reduce his army from 32,000 to 300, that defied every rule of war. When God told Joshua to march around the walls of Jericho instead of attacking, that made zero military sense. When Jesus spit into mud and wiped it on a blind man's eyes, that wasn't a healing method. It was divine contradiction. What is God asking you to do that contradicts your comfort zone? What instruction are you resisting because it doesn't pass your logic test? Some of you are standing at the edge of obedience, stuck between what makes sense and what makes faith. And I came to tell you, you will never walk on water if you need to see the floor first. There is a moment when your spirit must say, I don't understand it, I can't explain it, I wouldn't have chosen it, but I trust you anyway. You were never called to understand God. You were called to follow Him. And trust True trust begins the moment your understanding ends. Some of you have mistaken silence for rejection. You've assumed that because heaven hasn't answered yet, heaven must have said no. But let me declare this to you with authority. Delay is not denial. It is preparation in disguise. God does not operate on your schedule. He is not intimidated by your urgency, nor is he moved by your impatience. We live in a world addicted to speed, fast answers, fast success, fast gratification. But the kingdom doesn't operate on microwaves. It moves by process, timing, and seasons. You see, just because God hasn't done it yet doesn't mean he's not doing it. It means he's still working in the unseen. And the problem with most believers is that we treat God like a vending machine. Drop in a prayer, press the right button, and expect an instant miracle. But that's not how faith works. Let me tell you something dangerous. Some of you are giving up in the hallway because the door didn't open fast enough. But what if I told you God's delay is actually divine protection? Imagine this. A 15-year-old asks for the keys to a brand new Ferrari. Do you give it to them? No. Because the power they desire would destroy them without the maturity to handle it. That's how many of us sound in prayer. We cry out, God, give me the breakthrough, but we lack the capacity to carry the weight of it. So heaven waits. Not because it is cruel, but because it is wise. God's delays are often divine checkpoints to develop your character before you step into destiny. The delay is not to frustrate you, it's to fortify you. Because what good is it to enter the next season if your mind is still trapped in the last one? There are people praying for marriage, but you don't know how to be alone without losing your identity. There are people praying for leadership, but you can't even manage your emotions, your schedule, or your mouth. God doesn't just prepare the blessing for you, he prepares you for the blessing. Listen to me. Joseph wasn't denied when he was thrown into the pit. He wasn't rejected when he was falsely accused and imprisoned. That was not denial. It was delay. And that delay positioned him to interpret Pharaoh's dream at the appointed time. 1 hour early, and he would have still been locked up. 1 hour late, and Egypt would have missed its solution. When God delays something, he's not just aligning things around you, he's aligning things within you. He's fixing your sight, purging your motives, stretching your endurance, and teaching you how to pray deeper than bless me. God is not in a hurry. He will never sacrifice your formation for your convenience. And some of you are in a season where everything feels still. It feels like nothing is changing. The door hasn't opened. The healing hasn't come. The breakthrough hasn't broken through. But hear me. Stillness is not stagnation. It is divine suspension. God is teaching you to trust in what you can't see and believe when nothing is moving. And the mark of spiritual maturity is not how loud you shout in church, it's how deeply you trust in silence. It's a type of worship that only comes from waiting. There's a type of revelation that only comes from delay. You won't get it in the celebration, you get it in the tension between promise and fulfillment. And so I ask you today, will you hold on when heaven is quiet? Will you stay faithful when your feelings tell you to walk away? Will you trust the timing of the one who exists outside of time? Because your delay, your long nights, your unanswered questions, your wilderness moments are not evidence of his absence. They are proof of his divine investment. He hasn't forgotten you. He hasn't rejected you. He is working, even in the pause. And when the appointed time comes, it will happen so suddenly you'll realize the delay was the stage being built for your unveiling. Don't misinterpret God's silence. He's not done. He's developing the weight of the answer. And when it comes, it will make sense why it took so long. There are some things God cannot teach you in a palace. There are revelations too heavy for convenience. There are dimensions of trust, identity, and authority that can only be discovered in the dry, hard, isolated places of life. You don't graduate into glory without surviving your wilderness. Let me tell you something you might not want to hear. The wilderness is not the enemy of your destiny. It is the evidence that God is preparing you for it. Some of you are rebuking a season that heaven actually ordained. You're binding the very silence God is using to teach you how to hear. You're running from a space designed to strip you, not to punish you, but to train you for what you're praying for. Don't confuse comfort with calling. Don't mistake the absence of applause for the absence of anointing. The wilderness is never about the spotlight, it's about the roots. God will take you through isolation to build the weight of your character before you ever carry influence, because you cannot lead in public what you have not conquered in private. You see, before you command storms, you must learn how to be still in one. Before you speak to demons, you must learn how to shut down your own thoughts. The wilderness is where you stop performing for people and start surrendering to God. And that kind of surrender isn't learned in a conference. It's learned in the quiet, in the loneliness, in the tension of unanswered prayers. Moses didn't receive his assignment in Pharaoh's court. He got it in the backside of the desert with nothing but sheep and sand for company. It was in that obscurity that God revealed himself through a burning bush. Why? Because God reserves his most personal revelations for the least glamorous environments. When you don't have a crowd to impress, your ears finally open. Some of you are in a season where nothing seems to be happening. Your gifts feel shelved, your prayers feel dry, and you're tempted to believe that maybe God skipped over you. But let me tell you with spiritual authority, wilderness is not abandonment, it is alignment. It is in the wilderness that God detoxes your soul, deconstructs your pride, and rebuilds your spirit. When you're in the wilderness, you learn to depend, not on strategies, not on friends, not on likes or validation, but on God. And in that place, what was once optional becomes essential. Worship becomes survival. The word becomes food. Stillness becomes strength. I remember hearing the story of a young woman who felt called to speak. For years, no invitations came. While others seemed to be rising, she stayed hidden. But in that hiddenness, God was digging wells inside her, teaching her not how to preach, but how to listen. Not how to be great, but how to be empty. Years later, when the platform finally came, she didn't echo trends, she released weight. Because her message wasn't learned in comfort, it was birthed in her wilderness. The danger is when you try to escape the very place meant to shape you. When you shortcut the process, you sabotage the outcome. That's why so many people can't carry what they pray for. They avoid the breaking, so they never carry the oil. The wilderness doesn't destroy you, it reveals you. It exposes the idols you didn't know you had. The fear you pretended wasn't there. The shallow faith masked as boldness. It is God's operating room, painful, silent, but necessary. Because when you come out, you're not just gifted, you're grounded. You're not just anointed, So if you're walking through a wilderness today, don't despise it, don't curse it, drink from it, learn in it, die in it, so something real can live in you. Because when God finally brings you out, you won't come out the same. You'll come out trusted. You'll come out clean. You'll come out ready. One of the most dangerous things in life is trying to interpret God's will through your feelings. Let me say it plainly. Feelings are not spiritual compasses. They're emotional smoke. Real, but not reliable. They fluctuate, they deceive, they exaggerate, and they lie. And if you let your emotions dictate your faith, you'll abandon God every time He leads you into something uncomfortable. God is not obligated to keep you feeling good. He is committed to making you whole. We live in a generation that has been taught that peace means ease, that joy means comfort, and that God's presence means pleasant emotions. But God often feels the most distant when He's doing His deepest work. That's not abandonment, that's surgery. You don't feel the hand of the surgeon, but you wake up healed. So stop asking, where is God, when you don't feel Him? Ask instead, what is He building in me? Because faith isn't built on emotion, it's built on conviction. Conviction that He is who He says He is, even when your tears blur the vision. Conviction that He's still moving, even when your heart feels heavy. Conviction that the silence isn't rejection, it's the soil for revelation. Have you ever been in a season where your prayers feel like they're hitting the ceiling? Where you go to church, you sing the songs, but inside you're numb? That's the real test, not when God is obvious, but when He is quiet. That's where real trust is forged, not in the shout, but in the stillness. Let me tell you a story. A man loses his job, his wife is battling depression, and his child is diagnosed with a learning disability. He prays, fasts, gives, and yet the situation worsens. He tells himself, maybe I don't have enough faith. But the truth is, he's in the classroom of trust. Not the kind of trust that dances when everything's good, but the trust that says, though He slay me, yet will I hope in Him. That's not hype, that's holy resilience. God does not always explain, but He always sustains. Your emotions are not the evidence of God's activity. His word is. And that word will not fail. Feelings may fail, friends may fail, but truth remains anchored. You don't need to feel God to follow Him. You just need to know He's faithful. And that knowing will carry you when nothing else can. The problem with many believers today is that we only see through the lens of what's happening to us and not what God is doing through us. And if you don't lift your perspective, you'll miss divine strategy because you were offended by divine silence. Let me tell you something that will free you. Just because you can't trace God doesn't mean He isn't tracking you. There is always a bigger picture in play, a higher narrative unfolding. You may be stuck in the scene, but God is working on the whole story. We are too quick to judge a season by its discomfort. But pain doesn't mean punishment. It often means positioning. God's ways are not random, they are righteous. But righteousness doesn't always feel right. It sometimes feels like betrayal, like abandonment, like confusion, but it's still God. You remember Esther? She wasn't promoted to the palace for luxury. She was placed there to shift the course of history. But she didn't know that at first. She only saw her position. She didn't realize it was divine placement in disguise. And when the time came to risk everything, her obedience saved a nation. So here's the question. What if your inconvenience is actually an assignment? What if your trial is a tool? What if your interruption is the very strategy heaven designed to answer someone else's prayer? You see, we cry out, God, use me, but then we complain when He uses pain, delay, or obscurity as the path. Yet in the kingdom, discomfort is often the delivery system for destiny. Some of you are in places you didn't ask for. Relationships that stretch you, jobs that frustrate you, seasons that confuse you. But what if that's the exact environment God chose to sharpen your discernment, train your compassion, or prepare you to lead someone else out? You are not abandoned, you are strategically placed. Don't curse the detour. That detour may be the only way to the person who needs what you carry. Your storm may be someone else's survival story. Your scar might be someone else's sign of hope. You may not understand why God led you here, but if you trust Him, He'll look back and say, if I hadn't gone through that, they wouldn't be free. Because in the kingdom, your life is never just about you. And when you trust Him, even the detours become destiny. There is a kind of trust that doesn't wait for answers. It doesn't demand explanations. It's the kind of trust that stands in the dark and still says, He is good. That's not ordinary faith. That's mature faith. That's kingdom trust. And let me tell you something most people won't. Sometimes you won't get clarity until after the battle is over. We have a dangerous obsession with understanding. We want the blueprint before we take the step. We want confirmation before we walk. But God doesn't always hand out explanations. He hands out instructions. And your obedience must be louder than your questions. Do you know what true trust is? True trust is when you keep moving even when the map is gone. It's when you don't feel strong, but you keep showing up. It's when everything in your mind is screaming, quit, but your spirit whispers, He's still God. That's not emotion, that's alignment. God will test your trust by leading you where logic cannot follow. And when He does, the question is not, do you understand, but will you obey? Understanding is optional, obedience is not. Because faith doesn't walk by sight and it doesn't walk by comfort either. It walks by surrender. Let me speak directly to someone. You keep saying, God, just show me why. But what if God's silence is protecting you from a weight your heart can't handle yet? What if the answer you think you need would become a distraction from the faith He's trying to build? You're trying to reason with a God who is not committed to your convenience. He is committed to your transformation. It's a woman who lost everything, her job, her health, her relationships. In her words, I stopped asking why when I realized that trust meant walking blind. Years later, she didn't just recover, she became a refuge. People who were falling apart ran to her. Why? Because her trust became their anchor. What she enjoyed became what they stood on. That's the kingdom. Your trust is never wasted. It becomes legacy, it becomes light. It becomes the road someone else walks on when they can't see their way forward. You will not always understand the hand of God, but you must always trust His heart. And when you can trust, even when it hurts, even when it breaks, even when it leaves you with questions, you are not weak. You are becoming unshakable. And that kind of trust, that's the kind that moves heaven. There will be moments in your life where the silence of God feels louder than His presence. There will be seasons where your prayers feel unanswered, where the path makes no sense and every door you knock on stays shut. But do not misinterpret confusion as absence. God is not absent. He is strategic. He is sovereign. He is working a plan that you may not see, but you are still a part of. You may not have the answers. You may not know the outcome. But let me remind you, you are not walking blind. You are walking led. Led by a God who sees the end from the beginning. Led by a king who never wastes a tear, never misses a detail, and never forgets a promise. So when you don't understand, trust anyway. When it hurts, obey anyway. When nothing makes sense, worship anyway. Because that kind of faith moves mountains. That kind of trust builds nations. That kind of surrender shakes the kingdom of darkness. You don't need to know how. It's enough to know who. And if you know that He is good, if you know that He is faithful, then you can face the unknown with boldness. You can walk through the fire without fear. And you can live with peace even when the pieces don't fit. Trusting God when you don't understand isn't weakness. It is spiritual maturity. It is the posture of the unshaken. It is the sound of a heart that's been through the storm and still says, nevertheless, I will follow you. So I challenge you today not just to believe God when it's easy, but to trust Him when it's dark. To praise Him when there's no sign. To walk with Him even when the way feels hidden. Because when you do, you will discover that He was always working, He was always near, and He was always faithful. Good luck on your journey. May you walk in strength, may you rise in boldness, and may you trust Him like never before. Thank you. Thank you for leaning in. Thank you for choosing faith over fear. And thank you for daring to trust the God who never fails.